Hi everyone, today's guest is Colonel Joseph Gilpin, who's the Director of Safety for Air Force Materiel Command and a former Air Force recruiter whose 25-year career spans munitions command, fire sustainment, and nuclear surety safety. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Danny. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Could you walk me through your background a little bit to better understand your career, where you come from, and how you got here today?
Yeah, easy enough. So I've got to start with talk to my public affairs to make sure this was good to go, and it was. And they told me to make that obligatory statement that the views, opinions, and comments are mine and mine alone. Don't represent the views of the Air Force and or headquarters AFMC. So we'll get that part out of it. So man, this started years ago, and probably I'm going to guess before you were on the face of the earth. April 18th, 1989, I raised my right hand to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and took my first airplane ride ever from Louisville, Kentucky, down to San Antonio, did basic training, and started what I thought was going to be a 4-year career. I literally, like a lot of folks back then and a lot of folks today, I came in to do 4 years, get my educational benefits, learn a good technical trade, and then I was going to go back out to the civilian workforce and go do my thing. It got in my blood. Probably about 2 to 3 years in, I knew I was going to be a career airman. The camaraderie, the esprit de corps, being part of something bigger than myself was just for me that foundation I needed in my life. And so off I went. I started off my enlisted career at Barksdale Air Force Base. And I've done a little bit of everything through the years. In the interest of time, I won't bore you with all of them, but you captured my 25 years commission. I also had 11 years enlisted. So in totality, I've got 36 years of total active federal military service between enlisted days and as an officer. So I started off working on air-launched cruise missiles, conventional air-launched cruise missiles, went through some mandatory cross training, went into mobile communications. I told everybody we were AT&T for the Air Force before there was an AT&T, because I worked on a mobile switch. And then I had a buddy recruit me to be a recruiter. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I get into? Loved recruiting, but I had a commander approach me. I was graduating school, one of our professional military education classes. And he approached me and said, hey, have you ever thought about being an officer? And quite honestly, I hadn't. Had the conversation, went home, had the conversation with my wife, and got commissioned. I got picked up for officer training school and then commissioned in January 14th of 2000. So I've been commissioned a little over 25 years now. And I got hired to be an aircraft maintenance officer, but I'm a core munitions officer. But again, I've done a little bit of everything in my officer career as well. Probably one of my highlights is I had a chance to teach college-level Air Force ROTC at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Det 550, up in Troy, New York. It was a great thing, and some of those cadets are doing well. But you're getting old as a person when the cadets you taught are now lieutenant colonels and colonels. You've been in the Air Force a long time. But that's got a kind of quick summation.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your story, your background. Definitely very interesting. I want to dive deeper into your leadership principles and philosophy. You touched upon a little bit about teaching and seeing your students becoming lieutenant colonels and colonels. But what is your perspective on leadership? Maybe some principles that you can share.
Oh wow, we could talk for hours. This is something I absolutely love, and so I was excited about the opportunity when you asked me to do this. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, I did a session with a group down out in Colorado and spread all over. I had some pre-command training down in Maxwell Air Force Base, and one of the chiefs there liked some of the stuff that I was talking about. So he asked me to get together with his team, and we had about 60 folks, and we really dove deep into emotional intelligence. And I'll start there. So I tell everybody, and let me say, I didn't get to the point where I am today, Danny. It's been a lifelong journey. I've remained a student of the profession. I read a bunch of books. I read a bunch of articles. I'm on LinkedIn. That's where you and I connected. But I've remained a lifelong student of the profession. And I would say that my leadership style has changed and morphed through the years as I've learned more. But really what I tell everybody with consistency, and I'll share this with you as you're expanding and trying to, you're getting your foothold in this space. I tell everybody leadership starts with the reflection in the mirror. Now, if you think about that, right, every morning at some point we probably look in the mirror, brushing our teeth or trimming our mustache or doing. And I argue right there, that's where leadership begins. And what I mean by that is that keen sense of self-awareness, that keen sense of insight, knowing your strengths, knowing your quirks, your idiosyncrasies. The better you lead yourself, the better you can lead folks. And some of the challenges today, Danny, we're in for the Air Force and corporate America. Well, we've got 4 or 5 different generations in the workforce, all the way from the baby boomers, the Gen X, the millennials, the Gen Z, and I think Gen A is the next one, right? So we've got this cross-generational group of individuals, and each of them need to be led differently. And so I think it's important to take the time as a leader in the organization to get an insight and perspective of what makes each of those different groups tick. And then really you'll read lots of literature. There's all kinds of different leadership styles, but it truly comes down to situational leadership, is evaluating each person, each case on its individual merits, and then deciding, hey, what do I need to do? How do I need to approach this? And it goes, starting that conversation with the reflection in the mirror and knowing yourself, and then really getting to know your teammates, getting to know what's important to them, getting to know what they value, and then leveraging that to motivate the team. I tell you, one of the core things for me, without fail, is I expect myself and members of my team is we're going to treat everybody with dignity and respect, and treat them like valued members of the team. So back to the emotional awareness and emotional insight, having that, that keen self-awareness and insight. Further than that, then you get into things like, what is, motivation, and we talked about that. Having some empathy, having that self-regulation and things like that. So really, it's been a lifelong process. Young Airman Gilpin just followed orders. I just did what I was told, and then I just did the best job I could. I came to work with a positive attitude, mostly. I had bad days. But I just followed the orders that I could. And then what I did is I watched the leaders around me. And I will tell you, you can learn just as much from a bad leader as you can a good leader. And then really, where do you fall on that continuum? As I look back and reflect, having that self-awareness, there are times that I think I wasn't the best leader I could have been. But I look back on those and I learn from them. And I try to not to repeat those mistakes, right? And so, things that make me tick that are important to me are those things, right? Those principles to me are expectations, not only of myself, but my teammates. Dignity and respect, and treated like a valued member of the team.
I appreciate you sharing this perspective. I'm curious to learn what's your perspective on balance between something you mentioned, motivating your subordinates versus enforcing your orders or rules that you wanna do. Where is the balance between the two?
It's a tough tightrope to walk, right? We are a military organization. We are a hierarchical organization, and we don't need to remind people of the team, right? When I introduce myself as Joe Gilpin. When I'm in uniform and out of uniform, I'm Joe Gilpin. I don't need to say I'm Colonel Gilpin, right? People can see that. So for the most part, I would say individuals who join the Air Force do so voluntarily. Well, they do. It's a voluntary Air Force, right? Everyone joins voluntarily. But what I was going to say is, for the most part, folks try to do the best job that they can. And so you really don't have to get into that, so much that enforcement. They know it's a lawful order. There are some things that has to be a lawful order, has to be clear and understood, acknowledged, and things like that. So in my experience, there's not too many of them that I've had to say, I'm ordering you to do this, because as a voluntary force and people coming in of their own free will into the Air Force, they know, hey, this is what we've got to do. Now, there are some times, we work long hours, we miss holidays, we miss birthdays, we miss anniversaries because of the nature of what we do. But the key is kind of, again, motivating your team, keeping them, keyed in on their why they came in the Air Force and why we're doing what we're doing. I think that's one of the important things with today's generation of airmen. We as senior leaders, dinosaurs like me, we don't do a good job of articulating the why, helping them connect to the mission. And I think the better we can do that with the young, the Gen Z and some of the millennials, understanding that why, you don't have to get into that, I'm ordering you to do it. Now, if you fail to obey a lawful order, there is discipline and consequences to that, right? I mean, there have been cases, unfortunately, that I've had to hold folks accountable for the poor choices and the decisions that they made. And they'd always want to say, well, Colonel Gilpin did this to me. And I would correct them. I said, no, in actuality, all I did was hold you accountable, right? We all have this thing, I like to say, when I do these mentorships and things like this, agnostic to our rank, our background, our socioeconomic upbringing, our ethnicity, our height, our weight, agnostic to all that, Danny, we all have one core thing that we own and possess, and that's the power of choice. And so generally, good choices come with good results. Poor choices come with not so good results. That's not only in the Air Force or the military, that's in civilian society as well. right? Someone decides to drive drunk, they get pulled over, they made a poor choice, poor consequences. So really, we each have that power of choice each and every day, right? I challenge what version, if this is your work, Danny, I don't know if you do this or the work, but I always tell everybody, what version of yourself are you bringing to work today? I challenge everyone to always bring the best version of themselves, and I do the best. I try to walk the walk, talk the talk, make sure I'm not a hypocritical leader, but I have bad days. I'm human. But so goes the boss, so goes the team. So I think it's very important, as a senior leader, bring the best version of yourself to work each and every day, motivate your team to do well, and then, help them understand the why, remind them sometimes why they came in the Air Force, and then why they're doing what you're asking them to do. And like I said, thankfully, I can count on one hand probably the number of times that I've had to really use that lawful order as a phrase or enforcement.
Thank you. Thank you for this perspective. You touched upon different generations, Gen Z, millennials. In your experience, how do you approach these younger generations to either attract them to join the Air Force, or maybe just on the communication level, what is the difference that you noticed in your career?
Yeah, good question. I'm out of the recruiting business, but I'm not really. We have a campaign within the Air Force that says we are all recruiters. And since being a recruiter years ago, it still remains near and dear to my heart. The Air Force has been great for me and my family. And so, we are all literally recruiters, especially when we go back to our hometown. But kind of what we talked about, I think the key is just doing a little study and understanding the difference of what motivates the different generations. There's a great book out there, and I don't get any kickback on any profits from the sales or anything, but there's a great book out there called Gen Z Unfiltered. And it is just an absolute phenomenal read, and it really keys in on Gen Z, but it helps you understand some of those things that we talked about. What motivates Gen Z? How do they want to be communicated with and things like that? What do they like? I'm looking at a sheet here because I put it in front of me because there's too much for my brain to assimilate. I'm going to go through it real fast. Some of the defining traits of Gen Z, digital natives, right? I have 2 Gen Z girls, and as you saw at the beginning, Danny, I'm pretty inept with electronics, so I'm not quite that Gen Z. I'm not that digital native. I carry an Android, don't judge me. But when I have my work phone's an iPhone, and sometimes I mess it up and I have to ask my younger daughter, who's a high school senior about to graduate, hey, Kaylee, what do I do here? I don't know what to do. You're right. So digital natives, some of the core values are individuality, authenticity, recognition, a big thing on mental health. And it's important to them. From a work style, it says adaptable, thrive in flexible setting. And again, I know I'm hyper focused on Gen Z, but that's kind of the young generation. And then, communication preferences. I found this interesting, instant messaging, collaborative platforms. Not so much that part, but we had some feedback when I was down at this class that someone that came in and did a generational briefing said that really some of the face-to-face communication was much preferred versus email and stuff like that in some workspaces. So that, I'd say just be a student of the profession, learn and understand. Take some time to learn and understand the differences in the generations, and more down to the individual level, what motivates that person and how you can help them fulfill whatever they did, why they came in the Air Force.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Shifting a little bit back to leadership and leading under pressure or in a chaotic environment, what is your perspective or leadership style in uncertainty or when it's a high stakes environment and any decision can be almost life altering? What is your psychological approach to these kinds of environments?
Yeah, great question. We talk about a VUCA environment, vulnerable, uncertain, chaotic, and I forget the A, adaptable or whatever it is. I think the key, and as I look back and I told you in reflecting in my leadership style under high stress environments with sleep deprivation, in an exercise scenario, I think the key that I've learned, and I haven't always done as well as I could have, is remain calm under pressure. Remaining calm, keeping your collective wits together, showing that strong front, even if it's a front, showing that strong front for your team. Because as we alluded to earlier, about bringing the best version of yourself to work, Danny, so goes the boss, so goes the team. And sometimes that's easier said than done when you're in these high stress situations, right? I mean, we're each individuals and personalities clash, personalities mesh and meld together sometimes well, but just as much personalities and leadership styles clash. And, always never confront or disagree publicly with your boss. That's bad. That's just bad business. But really, as a leader, your team's looking to you and they're looking to how you're responding to that stressful situation. So I think what's imperative is remain as calm, cool, and collected as you can under those extreme conditions. I would tell you when in 2011, I spent most of 2011 in Baghdad, Iraq. It was my first deployment into that theater for that length of time. And back then they were still doing IDF fires at us, shooting rockets and mortars and all that at where we lived in camp. And it really scared me. I had two young girls at home. I had my wife at home, and we were getting these IDFs every night. And I came in the next day. I think I've been in country 1 or 2 days, and I was pretty spooked. I was pretty concerned. I was pretty scared. But then I saw my boss, who just had, was living the same situation that I was. He was a colonel. I was a major at the time, and I just looked to him for that guidance. And he had that cool, calm demeanor, and just had that presence of, Joe, it's going to be okay. This is what we've got to do. So I try to learn from that. It's probably the most stressful situation I've been in. Nothing compared to our special forces and some of the folks in Afghanistan and Iraq and things like that. But just watching that moment and then trying to make sure I emulate that and demonstrate that, keeping that calmness, being cool, collected, and, a strong front. Now, that said, I would also offer, we each sometimes get put into things that are bigger than us or more than we can handle. And I would say having a little vulnerability is not a bad thing. You can be vulnerable with your teammates without appearing weak, right? We associate vulnerability with weakness, and I would say no. Now, I didn't always think this. I tell everybody, and this, again, is not a plug for a book, but I read a couple Brene Brown books, and she really got me thinking, doing that self-reflection, that self-awareness. Leadership starts with reflection in the mirror, got me thinking about that vulnerability. So you can be a strong leader in rough situations and still show some vulnerability, because when it's all said and done, Danny, regardless of our rank, where we work, whether the janitor or the CEO, when you boil it down, we're all human beings and we crave the same things. We want to be valued members of teams, treated with dignity and respect. We want it to be seen and heard. And so kind of a long answer to a short question, but just that calmness and showing that strength has served me well. As I get ready to go into my new job in a couple months, I'm going up to Eielson Air Force Base. I'm taking over the mighty 354th MXG. And, that is a pretty austere location in terms of extremes of weather. And we've got a lot going on. And so I think it's going to be important for me I realize it's a high stress environment, but really, again, to remain as calm as I possibly can for my team and for myself. But should I need an outlet, I have to find that trusted friend that I can have an outlet for. Good question.
Thank you. Over your long career, you've learned a lot of lessons, and you've done a lot of self-reflection. So you have a set of principles that you apply every day. What do you think people in the civilian world are missing? Some of the principles or philosophies, or just understanding things that you want people to get, but most of them don't unless they're in the military?
That's a good question and a tough question, and I'm not sure that I'm the most equipped to answer it, because I've been in the Air Force my entire adult life since I was 19. So I joined just when I'm 19 years old, and this is all I've known. But I can answer that a little bit through my wife's perspective and some folks that I know have transitioned to the civilian workforce. So again, I'm not the most qualified to answer that, because I would say it really depends on the organization, right? There are some awesome organizations out there where people are thriving. Each and every day they strive to thrive. They're thriving, they're doing well, and there's some organizations where they're not. And each of those organizations, it comes down to a leader and the culture, climate, and environment that they're creating. So, again, I attempt best I can to do a culture, climate, and environment where folks enjoy coming to work. But that's not always the case. To answer your question the best I can, Danny, and I'll share this a little bit of through the years of my wife being a civilian employee. One of the things she's highlighted in her personal experiences, and again, I'm answering this vicariously through her, is her experience in different industries she's been in communications and social services, and right now she works at the Military Family Readiness Center, so she's been in a few. But one of the things that she says she sees that I have that she doesn't is really that sense of that camaraderie and that teamwork and that sense of connection and that sense of being part of something bigger than yourself. Because if you think about it, right, as airmen, sailors, Marines, Space Force folks, our newly formed Space Force, Coast Guard, all of our total forces, the reserves, we're all part of a higher calling and a higher thing. And just that in itself, I think, creates a bond, creates a connection, creates a commonality as human beings. And so having that, I've heard from a lot of folks that's lacking in corporate America. I can't speak for all of corporate America, but their personal experiences is, they're like, I often hear, I miss the teamwork. I miss the camaraderie. I miss the esprit de corps. I miss feeling like I'm part of something bigger than myself. Because most of corporate America is driven by profit and money, whereas obviously the Air Force isn't. So answering that the best I can vicariously through my wife and others who have shared stories of their experience in corporate America as opposed to their time in the military.
Yeah, makes total sense. And for the final part of the podcast, I like to let my guests share any kind of message to the audience, maybe lessons or advice for the listeners, or maybe something that you just want to put out there. So I'll let you do it right now.
No, that's awesome, and I appreciate that opportunity. So one of the questions I usually ask of senior leaders is, through your career, what is the best advice you received, and what's the advice you most often share? And as you can imagine, we've had the gamut, we've had the continuum. But probably the advice that I got years ago, and it was a wake-up moment to me. I was a staff sergeant at the time, but it was through a friend. And basically, the advice was, don't take yourself too seriously. No one else does, right? And so I've kind of thought about that, and it resonates in my brain. Don't take myself too seriously. Other people don't. Because sometimes we begin to believe in our own hype and get caught up in our hype. But I appreciate the opportunity because there are some key messages that I leave with everybody when I do a PD session or something like this. And so the first thing I'll share, whether in the military or in the corporate America, first thing I challenge folks to do is make yourself easy to lead. Now, it's going to mean something different to every person. But if you make yourself easy to lead, then that makes your boss's job easier. And, for us, the example I use is make sure your uniform looks good. Make sure you show up on time. Make sure your haircuts are within regulations. Ask what needs to be done versus being told what to do. So just make yourself easy to lead. The other one I says, be the person everyone wants to work with. And if you're a boss, be the boss that your people deserve to have each and every day. And then another challenge is to make yourself a high-value teammate, right? And that, again, if you Google high-value teammates, you'll see some of the characters and attributes of it. And that's having integrity and self-awareness and resilience and empathy. And just being a good person, a good human being. Again, back to being that person everyone wants to work with. So those are usually the first three challenges that I share. And then I kind of wrap it up with three questions that I challenge everyone as well to ask themselves the questions every day when they have that reflection in the mirror at whatever time they have it. And the first one is what value do you bring to the organization? What value are you bringing to your company? What value are you bringing to your team? Whether you're a teammate or you're a leader, what value do you bring each and every day? Meanwhile, thinking about those challenges, right? What value do I bring? I want to make sure I'm easy to work with. I want to be a high value teammate. I want to make myself easy to lead. And then I say, think about this a little bit. What's your legacy going to be? How are you going to be remembered? Most folks don't think about that, right? They don't think about their legacy. They just do what they do in the time. They do the best they can in the time that they have. But if you pause and think a little bit, what's your legacy going to be? How are you going to be remembered? Are you going to be remembered for doing a lot of great things and getting a lot of awards and, top salesperson and traveling all over the world? Are you going to be remembered for being a good human being that helped other people succeed? There's a wonderful poem out there by Linda Ellis called The Dash that really talks to this. And if you haven't seen it, Danny, I'd recommend looking it up, but it's fantastic. And the premise of the poem was, at the end of our lives, there's a tombstone. And in that tombstone, there's a little dash that represents when you were born and when you died. And so the question becomes, when folks are standing around your tombstone and they're reading that dash, what are they going to say? And then the last one is, it's a question that I think every leader needs to ask themselves, and it's situational. And I think it's a great question. And the question is, would I want to work for a boss who's just like me? Or would I want to work with a teammate who's just like me? Now, I remember when I came across this, I was like, man, oh yeah, patting myself on the back. But then I paused, Danny, and I looked back to my time. I was squadron commander in Osan, Korea, and then Langley Air Force Base. And there were some times at Osan, under that high stress situation we talked about, under sleep deprivation and exercise environments, and trying to make sure the jets are fixed to go in the air. There were some times I wasn't the best human being and commander and person that I could have been. So I reflect on that moment and I try to learn from it. But would I want to work for a person or a boss or a teammate who's just like me? And I think if people honestly answer that question, they'll find that they have a lot of enduring characteristics and attributes, but just as much, they probably have got some things that they need to work on as a leader and as a teammate. And then finally, wrapping all those together, I think if you think about those and you have that honest conversation with the reflection in the mirror, at the end of it, you can create that culture, climate, and environment where folks enjoy coming to work.
Well, lessons, great advice and perspectives, sir. Thank you for joining the show today and for sharing all of these perspectives. Appreciate your comment.